Starting a podcast is super easy, but making a podcast that is sustainable, well, hey everybody, Nick from Just Now Science here, and today we're going to talk about some of the things I wish I knew before I started podcasting. And while you're here, Lauren and I do a weekly science comedy podcast called Just Now Science, and we have new episodes every Tuesday. We talk about different myths and misconceptions we find online about different topics in science, so definitely check it out. Link in the description below. Now that we kind of got that out of the way, why don't we get into right away the stuff that you want to know. And the first thing that I wish I knew was how much competition there really was. I mean, Apple Podcasts alone has 1 million podcasts in their directory, and that's not including platform exclusives like Spotify and Castbox, their platform exclusives, or other premium content that exists behind a paywall. So just know that you are going up against a ton of different podcasts. And unless you're a celebrity or really good with social media marketing, SEO, something like that, it's going to take some time to build an audience. And I'm not suggesting it won't happen. I am just saying, though, that it'll take some time, which leads us to number. A lot of people get frustrated with how long it takes, I should say, for their podcast to really take off. And remember that 1 million podcasts that I just talked about? Well, of those 1 million, about 50% never make it past episode 7. And of the podcasts that do get past episode 7, another 50%, another half, never make it past episode 25. And if you think about it, episode 7, if you do a weekly podcast, that's 7 weeks. That's not even 2 months of podcasting, and people quit. Half. So while there's only roughly 400 to 600,000 active podcasts in Apple, it's still important to know that the other half exists simply because they appear in searches. But why do people quit? I mean, to me, there's a bunch of reasons. Let me get that straight. And you could be telling a story, and the story just might be over, and now that's it. Now it's time for you to move on to something else. There's a bunch of reasons, but 2 reasons that I see popping up a lot is, 1, burnout. People don't realize how much work and effort goes into making a really good podcast. And the second thing I should say is people get frustrated with not achieving their goals. I don't think people realize how long it takes to gain an audience and start making money. It's difficult. So if you're going to set goals, which you should, I shouldn't say if, set goals, but make sure they are attainable, which kind of goes nicely into number 3, which is podcasts don't make a lot of money. Unless you're Joe Rogan or NPR or some other big celebrity, it's really difficult to make money on a podcast. And this is something I'm going to dedicate an entire video to, just because there's so much information, and I see a ton of questions on how to get sponsors and all this kind of stuff, and we'll talk about that in a totally different video. What I do kind of want to talk about, though, is another question I see all the time on podcast support groups and forums, and it is number 4 on our list. That is, growing an audience takes time. Like I said before, unless you're already established, you are a comedian, a musician, some type of celebrity, if people know who you are, then this becomes a lot easier. But if you're like me and nobody knows who I am, well then why should anybody click on my show? This isn't 2004 where, it's kind of like the number of podcasts that exist are really low, so people are much more, it's a lot easier to find a show because not that many exist. But now everybody has a podcast, including nobodies like me. So fighting through that competition is really challenging. And one of the things I encourage you to do is to really utilize your social media, your personal social media account, because telling your friends and family, as scary as that might be, because getting their feedback isn't always positive, as scary as it is, you should do it. You do want to tell as many people as possible and put your content on every single platform, as small as it may be. There are great things like Podchaser, Castbox, Bullhorns, smaller platforms that maybe people don't really know about yet, but over time they will. And if you get in there now and you start interacting with the social media now, well, in the future, when they get big, there's a chance that they might help you out and throw you recommendations, tweet about you, all that kind of stuff. Who knows? I'm not saying it'll happen, but it can't hurt. The last thing I want to talk about before we end this and wrap it up is that audio quality matters, but it's not going to get you new listeners. I care a ton about the audio on my live streams, my podcast, YouTube videos, all of it. But I know that it won't gain us new listeners. No one's going to listen to my show and be like, oh my God, you guys have to listen to this podcast. The audio is so clean. Unless you're doing a show about audio, equipment and stuff like that, it's not interesting enough, right? The content has to be there to back it up. However, if your content is good, but the audio quality is abysmal, well, no one's going to listen long enough to get to the good content. They're all going to bail before they can hear it because the audio quality is so poor. So while audio won't necessarily gain you any listeners, it will help keep listeners, or at the very least stop them from leaving, which I guess is kind of like keeping them. These videos are hard. Some very quick things that I think you should have. You're ready to go with your podcast. You have a topic that you're passionate about. You have the equipment. You're set. You're ready. Make sure you have a logo, a good one. I can't tell you the number of logos I see. It's just people like. And while you're excited to be the face of your show, if people don't know who you are, why are they gonna click on it? They don't know you. They don't know what the show's about. You have to look at it from the listener's perspective. Why should they click on this? Why should they give it a chance? And if you don't give them any information beforehand, it makes it a little harder for them to try it. I would also start putting teasers out there. Use things like Wave, WAVVE, I think, and Headliner to make audiograms and post them on social media with captions, of course. Always have captions. It's really hard for people to go into Apple Podcast, search a podcast, randomly find yours, click play, and then stick around long enough for them to get to the good part. If you can find a good or interesting part and put it on social media, well, now you got someone's interest. Now they want to seek out your show because it looks interesting. And you can get your podcast in front of more people. Why wouldn't you do it? Definitely do it. And then I guess the last thing is to just, record. And I say this advice, there was a pause there, because I see so many people giving the advice, just get behind the mic and record. And yes, you should, if you're ready, if you have a plan, if you have all your other ducks in a row. And maybe another video that I'll do in the future is things that you need before starting your podcast. This is things I wish I knew. Things that you should have, or things that you need to have before launching, is a totally separate video. So yeah, I'll probably do that in the future. But anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, taking the time to listen to what I have to say. I really appreciate it. Liking, subscribing, and especially sharing. Sharing the video is huge. And also letting us know what you think in the comments below. YouTube loves when videos get comments. So if you like, or even if you don't like what I have to say, let us know. Let me know your perspective, your results. I'm very interested. Lauren and I mentioned before, we do a weekly science comedy podcast called Just Ask Science. I would love for you to check it out. We also live stream on Twitch every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, and on Saturdays at noon Eastern. And yes, it's usually cooking, but we do some weird stuff in the process. We drink out of shoes. Jerry does dance parties. We put our dog in costumes. It can get to be like a party sometimes. So, it's free. Why not check it out? And if you want to support us and you want to help us keep our podcast and everything advertisement free, then I encourage you to look at our Patreon. I have the links to everything I just said and more, including our social medias, in the links in the description below. The links are in the descriptions. The description's not in the links. That would be weird. I'm rambling. Anyway, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much. Later, nerds.